some kind of concrete recommendations or broad gestures in a policy direction that you would like to see vis-a-vis multiculturalism, transforming society, et cetera?
Yeah, I think we're at a really difficult moment in that there was one paradigm that we were used to, and we're seeing that paradigm got things wrong. It's not clear what the new paradigm is going to be. We're at a moment of experimentation. We're at a moment of trying out new different ways of thinking about race. I think that's part of the challenge in this Telluride experience we were talking about earlier, and that this moment of experimentation is also a vulnerable moment where things can go wrong. But we
do you think it's an accident that the sort of woke critical race theory philosophy imploded a classroom? Do you think any philosophy with respect to race would have been equally likely to implode such a classroom?
No, I think
like the multicultural, taking the multicultural ethos, for instance, as a comparison case.
Yeah, I think the multicultural ethos would have led to Black students not finding their voice and being disempowered. I think
how come?
How come? Yeah. Because there are indeed ways in which.
Well, why would they not just bring their food to the potluck, so to speak?
Yeah, because there are habits that are so ingrained in how we live together that make Blackness marked as poison. The Black food that's brought to the potluck marked as poisonous and something to avoid. That you can't have a happy potluck if everyone's looking at that food and saying that that's tainted stuff. You don't want to try that over there. It's maybe not quite that extreme in a seminar space, but there is something like that going on, and we need to find techniques to right that wrong.
So I guess this may be my last question. I'm trying to search myself to see if I have any more. Maybe two more questions. So what are your views on prison abolition? I know this is something that you've thought about.
Yeah, I don't think, I think the prison is a moral abomination. I think if the choice that we have today is releasing everyone who's incarcerated or keeping about 2 million people in cages, we should release everyone who's incarcerated.
Everyone, including murderers and psychopaths.
Yeah, I think the injustices that we're committing right now by keeping around 2 million people in cages is so gross, so grotesque, that it needs to stop right now. And we can, communities are experimenting with ways to deal with the problems that you're alluding to there. But right now we see we're doing a horrendous evil, and we need to stop it.
Would that apply to prisons worldwide or specifically to American prisons only?
The prison, keeping a person in a cage is a problem, right? Keeping a person in a cage is something that should never happen, whether that's in the U.S. or whether that's in a prison with a slightly thicker mattress in Norway or something.
So it's a worldwide abolition.
Right. I mean, the problem is a moral one. It's not a.
What do you think should happen when someone murders someone else and is caught?
Yeah, I think we're at a moment where there's all sorts of important experimentation happening with forms of transformative justice, of bringing together communities, bringing together those who've been harmed, and naming those harms, and together collectively as a community, as family members, as loved ones, coming up with a path forward. Exactly what those outcomes will look like. No, I'm not sure, but I trust in the local grassroots communities to find ways to figure that out, and to draw on the wisdom of ancestors and past practices that existed before there were a prison, before the prison was a thing, before we kept people in cages in order to.
Before there were prison, most murderers were killed, death penalty or stoned to death. Look at the Bible. Look at what are the historical practices from our traditions about how to deal with murderers and rapists? The death penalty. Prison is actually, relatively speaking, relative to pre-modern people, actually progressive.
Right.
Am I wrong about that?
Justice systems in years gone by are complicated. Sometimes there was money exchanged in response for a relative who was killed. There are all sorts of different things that were done in the past. I don't think we shouldn't be nostalgic, right? We shouldn't say things were better before 1800 or something like that. But we should be open to learning from the wisdom of the past, but also particularly communities where people are dealing with harm all the time. I think there are pretty Black and poor communities in the U.S. where it's clear that police and the criminal justice system is not going to make things better. The state is not going to make things better.
Mm-hmm. I have to admit, I'm really unsatisfied by your answer to what do you do with a murderer, because it gestures toward like vague community family meetings. What happens if the person murders again? Like, what do you do with someone that rapes a child? Do you have a family meeting with them? I mean, that sounds insane to me. And I want to be charitable to your answer here.
Right. And I think these are, human beings are complicated creatures. If they're causing harm, we all have been harmed and we all harm others. And we need to appreciate the complexity of each of us, including those who are causing grotesque harms. We also need to be able to keep our community safe, right? And sometimes that means removing people from communities. Sometimes it means.
But how do you do that?
Right,
prison, where do you put them?
I'm not a policy person, but I can see what it means to keep someone in a cage, and I can see that isn't helping something. That isn't the proper solution on a moral level. It's also not the proper solution in terms of the person coming out of being held in a cage, and now they're supposed to be a good person. It's just it doesn't seem like the transformation that the prison promises is actually happening. And if you take someone away from their loving relationships,
that I agree with. I mean, I agree. Our prison, the American prison system, and there are others that are probably as bad, does a piss poor job of rehabilitating people and isn't even oriented towards that purpose. Basically, people go to prison, they try to survive, they learn, they get buff so that people don't fuck with them. They learn to fight and survive, and they try their very best to do that. And then they come out often more hardened psychologically than they did when they go in. And that's even in the best of cases, right? Even in the case where this person went in with a totally noble urge to recognize how they harm people, whatever, they often end up like, I just had to survive in prison, right? And you leave with that survival mindset, I think, which is very much a shame.
Which I think is really about love, right? If you're not being loved, if you're away from the people who love you, if there's a wall between you and those who care for you, it's really hard to see how you can come out a loving person to those around you.
Yes, yeah, people do, and I just don't understand how you seem to be operating in a picture of the world where there are no people that just want to do bad things for no reason, right? Like everyone's pathologies, the violent tendencies of a particular person have to be a product of like circumstances that can be changed or not being loved enough. And we will have some effective way to reform people through conversation, which seems to me like wildly different from the real world, where in my view, like some significant fraction of prisoners fit that description, where like the right therapy mixed with the right lifestyle changes and community coming around really, and this person was never a problem for the community again. I have no trouble believing that applies to some fraction of people in prison. I couldn't put a number on it. But there's no doubt also a significant fraction of people that actually enjoy harming other people and have inherently violent tendencies, or if not violent, then predatory, right? Like, how do you explain the people that have had every advantage in life, loving parents, and yet go out and commit all kinds of crimes? It need not even be violent crimes. It could be like fraud, right? Like white collar crime. How do you explain white collar criminals born with a silver spoon in their mouths and loving parents? I don't think that human nature is inherently good and that we're all just waiting for reasons to be good. I think that's half the story. That's, that's most people half the time. But the other half of the story is that we have instincts to exploit. Almost everyone is capable of hurting others, and some people, I think, actually enjoy it. And I don't know if you watch any serial killer documentaries, but half the time they do find a story about how the father was abusive, but half the time they don't. Half the time it's like this kid had a great family and he came out the womb like torturing cats, and it's an anomaly, and it's unfortunate, but the idea that you can just reform people without warehousing them, without removing them from the population of people that they want to exploit, seems extraordinarily naive to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know you have a strong position on media criticism, and I wonder if the same kind of criticism might apply to these serial killer documentaries and the role that they have in our cultural imagination, right? That if we focus on these few people, right, these few incidents that do have serious mental health problems, right, that we may not right now have the resources to treat, right? If we focus on those people, we get distracted from the real problem, right? From an analysis of the complications of the world that reflect the human condition in general, rather than this sort of anomalous group that the media likes to focus on. And to go back to my favorite Saint Augustine here, right? We do all have a will to dominate and a will toward the good, right? And these are competing. And the way that the will to dominate can be suppressed and the will toward the good can be allowed to grow is when we have good role models, when we have loving communities that we live in, when we have forms of accountability and structures in which we live, and when we can acknowledge the harms that we create and that have been done to us. And I think in the vast majority of cases, right, the state is not in a good role to be, the one saying you're a bad person, you need to go away. You're a good person, you go away. The current, the system we have is, trusting the state, which everyone's suspicious of. But
so who else should be trusted? Who better?
Yeah, so I think we're in an era where there are all sorts of experiments in transformative justice happening at the local level in grassroots communities, where folks are saying, that in this neighborhood get together and sort of bring those who've been harmed.
Who defines what's a community, though? This is a problem. I mean, in New York, I live in an apartment building. I know a couple of my neighbors. If I were to go berserk and murder someone, who would count as the community authority to decide what is to be done with me?
Right. Again, so these examples of sort of going berserk out of the blue seem like they're in the sort of serial murder documentary genre of
40% of people in prison are there for violent crimes. Those are obviously, most of those are not murders, but we're talking about violence. That's not small.
Right. When folks are
I assault somebody.
Yeah, when folks are poor and don't have a lot of options, there's all sorts of stuff that happens in order to survive, and much of that is not ideal, right? But it's also not stuff that is going to be fixed with a state solution, and it may not be perfect, right? I agree that there are questions around what counts as a community. There are questions around how do we create structures of accountability at the local level. But if we're going to choose between trusting the state and trusting a local something at the local grassroots level, my faith is in the local community, the grassroots level.
I mean, it seems like a classic tyranny of structurelessness situation where you get rid of the bad guy, the state, which I agree is perpetuates all kinds of injustices, and then the person who takes command ends up being the most aggressive person in the room that everyone else is afraid of, and then the decisions are made by the local tyrant as opposed to the judge, and the criminal justice system. And the thing about democracy is that at the very least I have some say in terms of who I vote for if I'm upset with the regime and the status quo. but I have no say if it's just the most charismatic, tough person in my community that ends up calling the shots. I can't vote him or her necessarily out of office. I have no social contract with this person. My level of power may just be proportional to sort of my sway in the community. I may be a nobody, but I am one person, one vote with respect to the state. And there's something to be said for that, minimal as it is, level of accountability relative to basically anarchy.
No, I agree. It can be a problem that the tyranny of structurelessness at a local level can be a real problem. We need to develop structures of accountability at the local level. And it's not clear what they're going to be, but we can experiment, right? If we see something's going wrong, we see the state is doing a bad job of this, we see the prison is doing a bad job, it means that we need to try out new things, and we need to try them out at the local level, not at the national level.
If crime goes up by a factor of like X%, would you consider that a failed experiment? Is there some value of X such that, like, if crime went up by that much under such an experiment, you'd consider it failed?
Yeah, so I think aggregating data at the sort of national level or even city level often obscures what's actually happening, right?
Why?
Because there are all sorts of different things that count as crime.
Okay, so let's forget about every crime except homicide, because every homicide leaves a body, and it's the most reliable, maybe the only truly reliable crime metric, because people don't often get rid of body. Like, we usually know how many homicides there are because it leaves evidence. If homicide were to go up, is there some value of X where if it goes up by that much, that percent, you would consider like any given local experiment to be failed? You don't have to come up with a number. I'm just saying, would that be an evidence of failure if it spiked by some unacceptable amount?
Yeah, so here I think I agree with the Telluride philosophy that things fail and we try again and we try better, and they might fail again, but we try again and we try better because we know it doesn't work.
You're saying yes, like that would be a possible dimension of failure.
Yeah, I mean, if people are getting harmed, and more and more people are getting harmed, something's going wrong. We have to try something new.
So what went wrong in 2020 when we had the single greatest year-over-year increase in homicide in American history, according to Pew and various?
Yeah.
Would you say that a failed experiment in something, right?
So, I mean, these are...
Must it not have been?
These are very... everything circa 2020 is complicated by economic issues, by pandemic, by all sorts of reconfigurations in the American landscape.
No, but it didn't happen pandemic happened in the whole world. Homicide increase happened in America.
Right. I mean, there are a number of guns in the U.S. I mean, there are all sorts of factors. Sort of culture of violence in the U.S. is different from other places in the world.
I think one country had riots in every city and a racial reckoning about police, and that's like by far the most obvious cause of the subsequent rise in homicide, in my view. But maybe that's a debate for another time. Because we had guns the year before. We had, and it's mostly illegal guns, not Second Amendment guns, that are doing the harm. But I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is like, but what metrics would you be looking at for success in these like transformative justice experiments? What are you looking to that's like, this community did it right because look at what happened? What is that?
Right. Yeah. So if community members feel safer, if they feel as if they're less likely to be harmed, and if they feel as if when they have been harmed, they're happy with the outcome, right? If you look at surveys of crime victims now, many of them are not happy with the outcomes when the perpetrator goes to prison. They don't think longer prison sentences are a good idea, right? So I mean, I think these sorts of metrics of how does are those who survived forms of harm satisfied with the outcome and with this reweaving of the fabric of their community? Those seem important to look at.
So what role do the police play in this vision? Do the police still exist as they do today, or are they gone, or is it, how do you view that?
So again, I'm not a policy person, but it does seem like we're at an important moment where mental health professionals are being recognized for the important role that they play in communities. Where we're wondering, do you really need a police person to be directing traffic? Right? Could there be other sorts of professionals that could be directing traffic? What are the if we've been fostering a culture of violence among the police, how can we sort of narrow the role of police such that others who are better fit for other professionals who are better fit for the jobs we need them to do can be assigned to those roles.
So you would say leave the police intact, but have them do the work that they're best at.
Right. So I think
so like not directing traffic. Anything else?
I think we're at a moment of scaling down. When there are mental health crises, you don't need a police officer. You need a mental health counselor, right?
It depends if the person having a mental health crisis, if violence, the potential of violence is part of their mental health complex. And in many cases, the people calling 911 are their own mothers who know their mental illness better than any mental health professional, and have been negotiating it for years, and generally know how to calm them down when they're having an episode better than anyone, because it's like unique to each person often. And the fact that they've called 911 is sometimes a result of the fact that like, I can't handle this one and I'm scared, right? How is a mental health professional with no physical skills in terms of how to protect yourself, how to subdue someone while keeping them safe, going to necessarily be the default in that situation? I don't necessarily see how that is an improvement. My own view would be that what you want in that moment is someone who is extremely skilled physically, who knows how to subdue somebody without harming them, right? It's like the paradigm is like a jujitsu black belt, because jujitsu is all about how to like restrain someone without necessarily injuring them at all. And I've talked to at least one cop on my podcast who was a black belt in jujitsu and talked about the number of times he never had to go to his gun because he had such physical skills that he wasn't afraid. If someone threw a punch at him, if someone came at him, he knew how to deal with it in a way that didn't harm him or them. 99% of cops don't have that level of skill. So what you want is someone with that kind of skill. And that's not the skill of a therapist. Like, we're not talking about a therapist.
Yeah, so I agree. These are really complex and tragic situations.
Mental health professionals, sorry.
Yeah, these are really complex and tragic situations where families are grappling with those they love who have the potential to harm others. And if there's someone you love, you want the situation to de-escalate, right? You don't want the situation to get worse and worse. So the tool that we need for that job is someone who knows how to de-escalate the situation. Right? Maybe there are well-trained police officers who know how to de-escalate that situation. It seems like, given the culture of policing in the U.S. today, that's unlikely the case. It may be the case that you want mental health professionals in the lead, supported by others who have other skills that could be useful. But if the focus is on de-escalating, is on sort of cooling down the situation rather than heating it up, then I think we really need to think carefully about what are the professionals who should be in the lead in that situation. I
agree, de-escalation should be the priority. The problem is that de-escalation is not always possible, in my view. I'll use an example given to me by former head of Baltimore PD, Anthony Barksdale. He said he got a mental health call, and it was from the mother, and he was having an episode, probably schizophrenia, and he was able to calm the guy down. He thought, okay, good, this is going to be fine. We're gonna get him put him in the cop car, get him to the hospital, get him the help he needs. And all was going well until suddenly, in the boy's mind, he became a dragon, and now he's fighting the dragon. Right? How do you de-escalate in that situation? What you're dealing with is a mental illness that there is no pat formula. There's not even a sophisticated formula one can learn in school to necessarily switch somebody off in that scenario, right? Like, at the end of the day, you have to be able to protect the people around that person, because the person is having a break from reality, right? I'm very skeptical of the notion that there is this skill. There is such a thing as being good at de-escalating, but it only goes so far, right? Like there's no such thing as like the Jedi mind thing where it's like you're so good at de-escalating that you can just reliably 99% go into a situation and get two people to stop fighting. Have you ever tried to stop two people fighting? If they want to fight, it's pretty difficult, even if you know them, right? Like, and if you don't know them, if you're like a mental health professional, oh, I studied how to stop fights for 4 years. It's like, okay, I'm sure you're better at it than average. I'm sure you're quite good at it. But the problem is the skill naturally maxes out at a certain level. And then you have to be able to, I often think of like the mental health thing as, we send the first mental health, person to a mental health call. And there's some success stories until there's the time that the mental health person gets beaten to a pulp. And then we say, okay, well, we're going to give you guys pepper sprays. And then slowly, step by step, we end up reinventing the cops. At least that's one plausible outcome, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a real worry and one that we have to be careful about, right? That we come up with alternatives to cultures of violence in the police, and then they start to look like the cultures of violence in police. That's a real worry. But we also need to tolerate experimentation. We need to be okay being frustrated with some things that aren't working perfectly. When we see we have a system that's not working well, it's going to take some time to figure out what works better, and there will be some mistakes along the way, and we need to collectively tolerate that. On the question of your sort of schizophrenic in the police car example, I agree these can be very challenging situations, and I have no expertise in psychiatry. I know there are mental hospitals where there are a lot of schizophrenics, and they have ways of they're used to dealing with these sorts of extreme situations without calling the police into the
they have chemicals that sedate you.
Right. So there are a range of.
So is that the suggestion to have? That's.
No, I think that the thought is that there are a world of professionals who every day deal with folks in mental health crises who deal with schizophrenics, and that's a skill set that we ought to take advantage of, and that we ought to bring into sites of crisis, particularly among poor and Black folks who are often not on the not getting the mental health services that they need.
Okay, Vincent. I think that brings me to the end of my questioning, end of my my grilling. You've been a great sport, and can you please tell my audience where to follow your work? If you have one, Twitter handle.